Hey guys! Tonight, we're stepping into the glittering royal palaces of ancient Egypt, where gold covered the walls, sweet perfumes filled the air, and powerful pharaohs ruled over one of history's greatest civilizations. But while many people dream of living inside a palace, very few stop to wonder what life was actually like for the women who shared it with the king. What did a pharaoh's concubine do all day? Were their lives filled with luxury and comfort, or with endless rules, rivalries, and uncertainty? As the candles flickered through long palace corridors, every smile, every conversation, and every glance could change someone's future. So, before we begin, if you enjoy relaxing history that helps you unwind and drift off to sleep, consider subscribing. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and allow your mind to wander back more than 3,000 years, to the banks of the Nile, where the great temples shine beneath the evening sky, and the hidden world of a pharaoh's concubine quietly begins. Imagine the palace after sunset. The heat of the day has finally loosened its grip on the stone walls. Beyond the gardens, the Nile moves slowly beneath a darkening sky, carrying the last reflections of the sun toward the distant horizon. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a quiet melody from a harp, while servants move softly through corridors illuminated by small lamps and flickering flames. Inside this enormous world lives a woman whose name history may never remember. Perhaps she arrived at the palace as a young woman from a noble household. Perhaps she came as part of a diplomatic arrangement, or entered royal service through circumstances that were never recorded. Her story might have begun far from the palace itself, in a village beside the river, in a wealthy estate, or within another royal household. Now she stands beneath painted columns, surrounded by people she barely knows. She has entered the world of the pharaoh, and that sounds glamorous until you begin to imagine what it meant. The word concubine can create modern images that do not always fit the complicated reality of ancient royal life. The women connected to a pharaoh could occupy different positions, and the evidence left behind is often incomplete. Some may have enjoyed considerable comfort and status. Others may have lived with little control over the direction of their lives. Their existence was shaped by the palace itself, a place where beauty, wealth, family, politics, and personal desire could quietly become tangled together. A woman who attracted the pharaoh's attention might be invited into his private world. Perhaps she would appear before him during an evening gathering, dressed in fine linen, wearing jewelry that caught the soft lamplight. Ancient Egyptian art often celebrated music, fragrance, flowers, elegant clothing, and graceful movement, all of which belong to the atmosphere of elite life. There may have been moments of deliberate charm, a gentle conversation, a shared cup of wine, a lotus flower offered with a smile, or a musician playing while the woman sat nearby. These moments were not necessarily dramatic. Sometimes attraction was quieter than that. A glance held for just a little longer. A woman leaning close to speak softly while musicians played in the background. A carefully chosen perfume lingering in the warm evening air. In a palace ruled by one powerful man, even small gestures could carry enormous meaning. Yet beneath the luxury was an uncomfortable uncertainty. The pharaoh was surrounded by people who wanted something from him, officials seeking favor, relatives protecting their positions, servants carrying private information, and members of the royal household whose futures could change with a single decision. For a concubine, closeness to the king could bring comfort and opportunity, but it could also create jealousy. And sometimes, the greatest danger in a palace was not outside its walls, it was the invisible competition unfolding quietly between them. So tonight, we will follow one imagined woman as she enters this strange and beautiful world, not as a queen, and not quite as a servant, but as someone whose place depends on a man whose attention can never be guaranteed, and before she ever meets the Pharaoh, there is another question waiting for her. How does a woman enter the most guarded household in ancient Egypt? The answer begins at the palace gates, where the outside world slowly disappears behind her, and where her old life is left waiting somewhere beyond the walls. The palace gates rise quietly in the darkness, and somewhere beyond them, a young woman takes her first uncertain steps into a world that will never again feel quite like the one she knew before. Perhaps she has traveled for days along the Nile, carried by a slow river boat whose wooden sides creaked gently against the water. Perhaps she arrived with a small group of attendants, her belongings packed carefully into woven baskets, her finest linen folded beneath layers of cloth. The journey itself may have been beautiful. The river would have opened before her like a silver road, bordered by green fields and tall reeds. Fishermen would have pushed their boats into the morning mist. Farmers would have worked beneath the pale sun. Temples would have appeared in the distance, their enormous walls rising above the landscape, but the closer she came to the royal residence, the more distant her old life became. The palace was not simply a large house, it was an entire world. Within its walls lived officials, scribes, guards, craftsmen, musicians, servants, children, relatives, and members of the royal household. There were kitchens where food was prepared from dawn until evening. Workshops where jewelry and fine objects were produced. Storerooms filled with grain, oil, linen, and fragrant substances, and somewhere at the center of this enormous community was the Pharaoh himself. For the woman entering this world, the first impression may have been overwhelming. The walls were painted in colors drawn from earth and stone, ochre, deep red, pale blue, and green. Columns stood like silent forests, their capitals shaped like papyrus or lotus blossoms. Incense drifted through the courtyards, mingling with the warmer scents of bread, roasted meat, flowers, and the river air. Everywhere she looked, someone seemed to know where they were going. A servant carrying folded linen, a scribe holding a wooden writing board, a musician disappearing behind a doorway, a group of women speaking quietly together before continuing down a shaded passage. She, however, would have had to learn. The palace had its own rhythm, its own hierarchy, and its own invisible boundaries. Not every room was open to everyone. Not every person could approach the royal family. Not every conversation was meant to be overheard. A woman connected to the royal household needed to understand these rules, even if no one explained them directly. Perhaps an older woman showed her where to sleep. Perhaps she was introduced to others who had already spent years within the palace. Some may have been welcoming. Others might have watched her carefully, wondering why she had come, who had brought her, and whether the Pharaoh might notice her. That first evening, she may have sat quietly while unfamiliar voices moved beyond the walls. For the first time, she would have understood something important. The palace was beautiful, but beauty did not make it simple. Her clothing, her manners, the people she spoke with, and even the places where she was seen could influence how others regarded her. She would slowly learn how to move through this complicated world. Perhaps she would spend mornings with other women, talking softly while servants arranged their hair. Perhaps she would walk through gardens where pools reflected the sky, watching ducks move between lotus flowers. On some evenings, music might drift from a distant courtyard, reminding everyone that the royal household was awake long after sunset. And then there were the moments when the Pharaoh himself might appear. For a woman hoping to gain his attention, preparation could become part of daily life. A carefully chosen linen garment, a necklace of beads, a flower placed in the hair, a pleasant fragrance carried lightly on the skin. None of these things guaranteed anything. The pharaoh's attention was his own to give, and perhaps that uncertainty made every appearance before him feel more important. One evening, as lamps begin to glow along the palace walls, our imagined woman stands among others in a quiet reception hall. She does not know what tomorrow will bring. She only knows that she has entered the pharaoh's world, and now she must discover where, exactly, she belongs within it, because behind the palace's magnificent doors lies another hidden world entirely, a world of women, servants, routines, friendships, and rivalries, and that is where her new life will truly begin. By the time the first few weeks had passed, the palace no longer felt quite so enormous. The corridors were still long, the courtyard still confusing, and the painted walls still seemed to hold secrets that no newcomer could easily understand. But slowly, our imagined woman began to recognize familiar faces. She knew which servant brought fresh linen in the morning. She knew where the musicians gathered when the sun began to fall. She knew which garden remained cool beneath the shade of palms, and she was beginning to understand something more important. In the royal household, belonging was never simply a matter of where you slept, it depended upon your position. The word concubine can make ancient royal life sound more organized than it really was. The surviving evidence from ancient Egypt does not give us a single, simple picture of a formal harem filled with women waiting for the pharaoh. Royal households changed across different periods, and the women connected to the king could have very different backgrounds and responsibilities. Some were members of elite families, some may have been foreign princesses connected to diplomatic marriages, others may have entered royal service through circumstances that history has forgotten, and some women who lived within the palace may never have been intimate partners of the pharaoh at all. This uncertainty is important because the palace was not simply a place where women waited for the king. It was a living community. A woman who became part of the pharaoh's intimate household might suddenly find herself surrounded by privileges that ordinary Egyptians could only imagine. She might have access to better food, fine clothing, servants, and comfortable surroundings, but privilege came with something else: visibility. Everyone knew who belonged near the center of power. And everyone understood that the closer someone stood to the pharaoh, the more attention their presence could attract. For a young woman, the first challenge was learning how to behave. She had to know when to speak and when to remain silent. She had to understand the difference between being noticed and becoming a nuisance. Even something as simple as entering a room could carry meaning. Perhaps she was invited to an evening gathering where musicians played softly and servants carried trays of food. Perhaps she wore a new linen dress and a necklace of colored beads, carefully chosen for the occasion. She would not need to behave dramatically. In a palace, subtlety could be more powerful. A quiet smile, a gentle conversation, a moment spent listening rather than speaking, a lotus flower held loosely between her fingers. If the pharaoh noticed her, perhaps she would understand it from the smallest change in the room, an attendant suddenly becoming more attentive, another woman watching from across the chamber, or a servant quietly asking her to remain after the others had left. But attraction alone did not create security. The pharaoh's attention could be temporary, and a woman who became too dependent upon it might discover how uncertain her position truly was. This was one of the great contradictions of palace life. Luxury could surround you while your future remained unclear. You might sleep beneath a roof decorated with beautiful paintings, wear jewelry that had once belonged to someone important, and eat food prepared by skilled cooks, yet still wonder what would happen if the king stopped noticing you. For now, however, our imagined woman is still young in the palace. She is learning. She watches older women carefully, noticing how they speak to officials, how they greet members of the royal family, and how they move through gatherings without appearing anxious. One woman may advise her to be patient. Another may tell her to keep her friendships few. A third may simply smile and say nothing at all. Perhaps that silence tells her the most, because everyone in the palace understands that affection is only one part of the story. There is also status, there is family, there is reputation, and there is the quiet struggle to remain secure in a place where circumstances can change without warning. As the weeks turn into months, our imagined woman begins to discover that her appearance matters more than she first realized, not because beauty alone guarantees happiness, but because presentation is one of the few things she can control: her hair, her clothing, her fragrance. The way she enters a room. Soon, she will be introduced to the elaborate world of royal beauty, where oils, cosmetics, jewelry, and fine linen become part of everyday life, and somewhere within those preparations lies a question she has not yet dared to ask. What happens when she finally wants the Pharaoh to notice her? The answer may begin with something as simple as a small jar of perfume waiting quietly beside her bed. Morning arrives softly over the royal residence, before the palace corridors fill with footsteps, before servants begin carrying trays through the courtyards. There is a quieter hour when the rooms of the royal women are still and peaceful. This is when the day begins with preparation. For the women living close to the Pharaoh, appearance was not simply a matter of vanity. In the world of ancient Egypt, cleanliness, fragrance, cosmetics, and carefully arranged clothing were deeply connected with dignity and social position, and so, within the palace, beauty became part of the rhythm of life. Our imagined concubine wakes as pale sunlight enters through a narrow opening in the wall. The air is already warm. Beside her, a small vessel of water waits. She washes carefully, removing the dust and oil that have gathered during the previous day. Nearby, another woman prepares fragrant oils, their scents released slowly into the room. There is no hurry. A palace morning has its own gentle pace. The first oil touch to the skin might be simple and practical, helping to protect against the dry climate. Other preparations could carry pleasant fragrances made from plants, flowers, resins, and aromatic substances. The smell of the palace would have been unlike the smell of the streets outside. Here, fragrance followed people through the corridors. A servant might pass carrying fresh flowers. A woman might leave a trace of scented oil behind her. Burning incense could drift beneath painted ceilings, blending with the smell of linen and warm stone. For someone accustomed to the ordinary smells of village life, the royal household must have seemed almost unreal. Then came the hair. Hair required attention in the hot Egyptian climate, and styles could communicate age, status, and fashion. Some women wore their natural hair carefully arranged, while wigs were also used by Egyptians of different social levels. Our imagined woman sits quietly while an attendant works. A comb moves slowly through her hair. Strands are separated. A braid is adjusted. A small ornament is placed into position. Perhaps a lotus flower rests near her ear. The preparation is almost meditative. Outside, the palace is waking. Inside, she watches her reflection in a polished surface, seeing not only the woman she has become, but also the person she was before entering these walls. Then comes the cosmetics. Ancient Egyptians used eye cosmetics, most famously dark preparations applied around the eyes. These substances could enhance appearance, but they also had practical and cultural significance. Our imagined woman carefully applies the dark color, not too much, just enough. Her eyes appear deeper beneath the soft morning light. She looks older somehow, more composed, more prepared. In another room, servants arrange clothing. Fine linen is folded carefully, its fabric light enough to move gently with the body. Jewelry is chosen according to the occasion. Beads, bracelets, earrings, and necklaces can transform a simple garment into something unmistakably royal. Yet even here, there are choices to be made. A woman hoping to attract the pharaoh's attention might select something especially elegant. Perhaps a necklace with warm golden beads, perhaps a fragrant oil with a subtle floral scent, perhaps a fresh lotus flower, carried naturally rather than displayed too obviously. The art of attraction, if it existed, would not necessarily have been loud. It could be a matter of timing, of confidence, of knowing when to appear and when to remain in the background. One evening, perhaps, our imagined woman passes through a palace garden where the pharaoh is speaking with officials. She does not interrupt, she simply walks slowly beneath the palms, her linen moving softly around her ankles, the fragrance of perfume barely noticeable in the warm air. For a moment, the pharaoh looks in her direction. Their eyes meet, then she continues walking. Nothing dramatic has happened, no words have been spoken, yet she knows she has been seen, and in a palace where attention can be precious, even a small moment may feel important. But beauty has another side. The more carefully a woman presents herself, the more she may be judged by others. The palace is full of eyes. Women notice jewelry, servants notice clothing, officials notice changes in favor. And those who have lived here longest may recognize the meaning behind a new perfume or an especially elegant garment. So our imagined concubine begins to understand that beauty is not only about looking beautiful, it is also about navigating a social world. Every morning, she prepares her face. Every evening, she removes the cosmetics, and somewhere between those two moments, she must decide how much of herself to reveal. Tomorrow, we will leave the mirror behind and follow her deeper into the palace, into the private world where the royal women spend much of their time, where friendships form quietly, where boredom can stretch for hours, and where even the most luxurious surroundings can sometimes feel like a beautiful cage. Morning arrives softly over the royal residence, before the palace corridors fill with footsteps, before servants begin carrying trays through the courtyards. There is a quieter hour when the rooms of the royal women are still and peaceful. This is when the day begins with preparation. For the women living close to the pharaoh, appearance was not simply a matter of vanity. In the world of ancient Egypt, cleanliness, fragrance, cosmetics, and carefully arranged clothing were deeply connected with dignity and social position, and so, within the palace, beauty became part of the rhythm of life. Our imagined concubine wakes as pale sunlight enters through a narrow opening in the wall. The air is already warm. Beside her, a small vessel of water waits. She washes carefully, removing the dust and oil that have gathered during the previous day. Nearby, another woman prepares fragrant oils, their scents released slowly into the room. There is no hurry. A palace morning has its own gentle pace. The first oil touch to the skin might be simple and practical, helping to protect against the dry climate. Other preparations could carry pleasant fragrances made from plants, flowers, resins, and aromatic substances. The smell of the palace would have been unlike the smell of the streets outside. Here, fragrance followed people through the corridors. A servant might pass carrying fresh flowers. A woman might leave a trace of scented oil behind her. Burning incense could drift beneath painted ceilings, blending with the smell of linen and warm stone. For someone accustomed to the ordinary smells of village life, the royal household must have seemed almost unreal. Then came the hair. Hair required attention in the hot Egyptian climate, and styles could communicate age, status, and fashion. Some women wore their natural hair carefully arranged, while wigs were also used by Egyptians of different social levels. Our imagined woman sits quietly while an attendant works. A comb moves slowly through her hair. Strands are separated, A braid is adjusted, a small ornament is placed into position, perhaps a lotus flower rests near her ear. The preparation is almost meditative. Outside, the palace is waking. Inside, she watches her reflection in a polished surface, seeing not only the woman she has become, but also the person she was before entering these walls. Then comes the cosmetics. Ancient Egyptians used eye cosmetics, most famously dark preparations applied around the eyes. These substances could enhance appearance, but they also had practical and cultural significance. Our imagined woman carefully applies the dark color, not too much, just enough. Her eyes appear deeper beneath the soft morning light. She looks older somehow, more composed, more prepared. In another room, servants arrange clothing. Fine linen is folded carefully, its fabric light enough to move gently with the body. Jewelry is chosen according to the occasion. Beads, bracelets, earrings, and necklaces can transform a simple garment into something unmistakably royal. Yet even here, there are choices to be made. A woman hoping to attract the pharaoh's attention might select something especially elegant, perhaps a necklace with warm golden beads, perhaps a fragrant oil with a subtle floral scent, perhaps a fresh lotus flower, carried naturally rather than displayed too obviously. The art of attraction, if it existed, would not necessarily have been loud. It could be a matter of timing, of confidence, of knowing when to appear and when to remain in the background. One evening, perhaps, hour. Imagined woman passes through a palace garden where the pharaoh is speaking with officials. She does not interrupt. She simply walks slowly beneath the palms, her linen moving softly around her ankles. The fragrance of perfume barely noticeable in the warm air. For a moment, the pharaoh looks in her direction. Their eyes meet, then she continues walking. Nothing dramatic has happened, no words have been spoken, yet she knows she has been seen. And in a palace where attention can be precious, even a small moment may feel important. But beauty has another side. The more carefully a woman presents herself, the more she may be judged by others. The palace is full of eyes. Women notice jewelry, servants notice clothing, officials notice changes in favor, and those who have lived here longest may recognize the meaning behind a new perfume or an especially elegant garment. So our imagined concubine begins to understand that beauty is not only about looking beautiful, it is also about navigating a social world. Every morning, she prepares her face. Every evening, she removes the cosmetics. And somewhere between those two moments, she must decide how much of herself to reveal. Tomorrow, we will leave the mirror behind and follow her deeper into the palace, into the private world where the royal women spend much of their time, where friendships form quietly, where boredom can stretch for hours, and where even the most luxurious surroundings can sometimes feel like a beautiful cage. By now, the palace has begun to feel familiar. The woman who once stood uncertainly at its gates now knows which corridors receive the morning sun, which gardens remain cool during the hottest part of the afternoon, and which servants can be trusted with a quiet conversation. Yet there is still much she does not know, because behind the grand public spaces of the royal residence lies a more private world, a world where women spend long hours together, where children play beneath shaded courtyards, where linen is folded, jewelry is repaired, stories are exchanged, and the slow rhythm of palace life continues almost unnoticed. The word harem can be misleading. The modern imagination often pictures a mysterious room filled with women waiting endlessly for the pharaoh. The historical reality was likely much more complicated. Royal households could include women of different backgrounds and positions, along with children, attendants, servants, musicians, and workers. Some women may have been connected to the king, while others were simply part of the enormous community that supported royal life. For our imagined concubine, most days are not spent beside the pharaoh. In fact, she may see him only occasionally. Instead, her life unfolds among women. Morning begins with movement. The rooms slowly fill with conversation. Someone is asking for a missing necklace. Someone else is complaining that the linen delivered that morning is not as fine as expected. A young girl runs through a courtyard before an older attendant gently calls her back. Nearby, two women sit beneath a shaded roof, speaking quietly about something that happened the previous evening. Our imagined concubine listens. She has learned that palace conversations are rarely as simple as they seem. A casual remark can reveal a friendship, a sudden silence can reveal discomfort. A woman who leaves the room unexpectedly may have received news that others have not yet heard, and so, our concubine begins to observe. She watches people. She learns who spends time together. She notices which women receive gifts and which servants seem especially loyal to certain households. The palace becomes a kind of living puzzle. There are no written instructions explaining everything. Much must be learned through experience. During the hottest hours, activity slows. The sun presses against the stone walls, and even the palace seems to become sleepy. Women retreat to shaded rooms. Some rest. Others work with their hands, weaving, sewing, or repairing clothing. A musician might practice quietly nearby. The sound of a harp drifting through a warm corridor can make time feel strangely slow. For someone accustomed to the busy work of ordinary life, this may seem luxurious, but luxury can have its own form of boredom. The hours stretch. There is nowhere urgent to go, no field waiting to be harvested, no market stall demanding attention. The palace provides nearly everything. And that means the mind has more time to wander. Our imagined woman may find herself thinking about home. She wonders whether the Nile still looks the same from the village where she grew up. She remembers the voices of people she once knew. Perhaps she misses a mother, a sister, a friend. These memories arrive unexpectedly, sometimes while walking through a garden, sometimes while lying awake at night, sometimes when she smells a familiar plant growing beside the palace pools. And yet, life continues. In the afternoon, the palace becomes active again. Servants carry fresh water. Food arrives from the kitchens. Women gather in shaded spaces. Children move between rooms under the watchful eyes of attendants. There are moments of laughter. There are quiet disagreements. There are friendships that seem genuine and others that are more cautious. Our concubine slowly discovers that friendship may be one of the greatest comforts available to her. A companion can make an unfamiliar place feel less lonely, someone to share a meal with, someone to whisper to when the palace becomes overwhelming. Someone who understands what it means to live under the constant possibility of being observed. But even friendship has limits. Everyone has a future to protect. Everyone understands that the pharaoh's attention can change the balance between people. And so, beneath the ordinary rhythm of daily life, something else is always present: expectation. Who will be invited? Who will receive a gift? Who will be remembered? Who will be forgotten? Our imagined woman does not yet know that these questions will eventually matter deeply. For now, she is simply learning to live inside the palace, and as evening approaches, she hears footsteps approaching from the far end of the corridor. A servant has arrived carrying a message. The women fall quiet, because the next part of palace life belongs not to the women themselves, but to the people who make their comfortable existence possible, the servants, and behind the palace's beauty. Their work is everywhere. The message has barely disappeared down the corridor when the palace begins to settle into its evening rhythm. The women return to their conversations. The musicians continue playing somewhere beyond the courtyard. and the servant who carried the message quietly vanishes behind another doorway. For someone living inside the royal household, these moments happen constantly. A cup appears before it is requested, fresh linen arrives each morning. Water is carried into private rooms, food reaches the tables while it is still warm, the lamps are filled before darkness becomes complete. The palace seems to take care of itself, but of course, it does not. Behind every comfortable moment is someone working. And for the women connected to the pharaoh, the servants may be among the most important people in their lives. Some servants may have been assigned to specific members of the royal household. Others worked in larger groups, supporting the kitchens, workshops, gardens, storerooms, and administrative areas that kept the palace functioning. Their work could begin long before sunrise. While the royal residents were still sleeping, someone was already awake. Water needed to be carried, bread needed to be prepared, clothing needed to be cleaned, floors needed attention, food had to be organized and delivered. The enormous household depended on countless small tasks being completed in the correct order. Our imagined concubine begins to recognize certain servants by sight. There is an older woman who brings her fresh linen, a young attendant who helps with her jewelry, a quiet man who works in the gardens and occasionally leaves fresh flowers near the rooms of the royal women. These people are not simply background figures. They are part of her daily world. Perhaps the most trusted among them become the people she speaks to most often. A servant may know when she is worried, another may know when she has received an invitation. Someone carrying trays through the palace might overhear a conversation that powerful officials would prefer to keep private. Information travels strangely in a royal household. It does not always move through official announcements. Sometimes it travels through footsteps, through servants entering and leaving rooms, through small changes in routine. A woman may notice that her usual attendant has suddenly been reassigned. A particular servant may begin appearing outside another woman's chambers. A gift may arrive unexpectedly, and suddenly, everyone starts wondering why. This is where servants become important in ways that are easy to overlook. They know the palace, they know its doors, they know who is awake at dawn and who remains awake late into the night. They see people when those people believe they are not being watched. But the relationship between servants and royal women is not necessarily simple. There is kindness. There may also be dependence. A woman who has grown accustomed to a particular attendant may feel anxious when that person is absent. At the same time, servants have their own lives and ambitions. They must navigate the palace hierarchy just as carefully as everyone else. Some may hope for advancement. Others may simply want security. A trusted servant could become extremely valuable. A woman preparing for an evening gathering might rely on her attendant to select clothing, arrange her hair, or prepare perfume, and if she hopes to attract the pharaoh's attention, that servant may quietly become part of the process, not through anything dramatic, but through small acts, a garment chosen at the right moment, a message delivered discreetly, a flower placed carefully in the room, a suggestion about where the pharaoh might appear that evening. Sometimes, the person who seems least important may know the most, and that knowledge could make servants powerful in their own quiet way. Still, much of their work remains invisible. At night, when the royal women sleep, servants continue moving through the palace. They carry lamps, clear away dishes, prepare rooms for the following morning. The palace never truly rests. Our imagined concubine begins to understand this as she wakes one night and hears footsteps outside her chamber. A servant passes silently through the corridor. Another follows. Their shadows move across the wall. She watches from her bed until they disappear. Then silence returns. For a moment, she wonders how many people are awake while she sleeps. How many hands are preparing the next day? How many eyes are watching the palace? And how many secrets are carried quietly from one room to another? By morning, everything will appear ordinary again. Fresh linen will be waiting, water will be brought, breakfast will arrive, the palace will look effortless, but now she knows better, and as another day begins, she discovers that the people who serve the royal household are not the only ones shaping its hidden world. There are also the objects they carry, the perfume jars, the fine clothing, the jewelry, the food prepared in distant kitchens. Each one tells a story about wealth, status, and the extraordinary comfort surrounding the pharaoh's household, and soon, our imagined woman will experience that luxury more closely than ever before. By now, our imagined concubine has learned that the palace has a language of its own, a language spoken not only through words, but through scents, textures, colors, and flavors. She begins to recognize the sound of certain footsteps in the corridor. She knows when the kitchens are preparing the evening meal. She can tell, simply from the fragrance drifting through an open doorway, whether someone nearby has been using a new perfume. And then there is the clothing. In the palace, even the simplest garment can tell a story. Fine linen is among the most important luxuries, light, cool, and carefully woven. It is suited to the hot Egyptian climate. The finest examples can be remarkably delicate, almost weightless against the skin. For a woman living within the royal household, clothing might be changed according to the occasion. There could be simple garments for ordinary days, more elaborate pieces for gatherings, and carefully chosen jewelry for moments when appearance mattered. Our imagined woman stands beside an open chest one quiet afternoon. Inside are folded linen garments. Some are plain. Others are decorated with beads or accompanied by necklaces and bracelets. She lifts one carefully. The fabric is soft beneath her fingers. For a moment, she thinks about how different this is from the clothing of ordinary people. Here, someone has spent hours making this garment. Someone grew the flax, someone prepared the fibers, someone spun them, someone wove the cloth. The palace may make luxury appear effortless, but every beautiful object carries the hidden work of many hands. Then there are the perfumes. Fragrance follows the royal household everywhere. Oils and scented preparations may be made from plants, flowers, resins, and other aromatic ingredients. Some are used for the body. Others may be burned or placed within rooms. For the women of the palace, perfume can become almost like a personal signature. One woman prefers a rich, warm fragrance, another favors something lighter, a third may have a scent that everyone recognizes before she even enters a room. Our imagined concubine has begun to develop her own preference. Perhaps she likes a gentle floral fragrance. She applies only a small amount. Not enough to overwhelm, just enough that someone standing nearby might notice, and perhaps that is precisely the point, if she hopes to attract the pharaoh's attention. Fragrance can become part of her quiet strategy. She does not need to approach him directly. Perhaps she passes through a courtyard where he is expected to appear. Perhaps she sits among other women during an evening gathering, wearing a new necklace and carrying the faint scent of flowers. Maybe the pharaoh notices, maybe he does not. The uncertainty remains. And then there is food. Royal meals are another world entirely. The palace kitchens are busy places. Grain is transformed into bread, beer is prepared, vegetables, fruits, fish, and meat appear in quantities that ordinary households could rarely enjoy. Dates and figs provide sweetness, onions and other vegetables accompany meals. Honey may be used when available. The Nile provides fish, livestock provides meat for those with access to it. Our imagined woman sits at a meal with other members of the household. Before her is a selection of food arranged carefully on dishes. She eats slowly. Around her, conversation rises and falls. Someone laughs quietly. Someone asks about a missing bracelet. A servant refills a cup. The evening feels almost ordinary, and yet, there is something strange about it. Everything she needs is here: food, water, clothing, perfume, shelter, comfort. The palace can provide abundance on a scale she has never known. But abundance does not always bring happiness. Sometimes, having everything you need only makes you more aware of the one thing you cannot control: the Pharaoh's attention. A woman may own beautiful jewelry and still feel insecure. She may wear the finest linen and still wonder whether someone else will be chosen. She may smell of expensive perfume and still be forgotten by morning. That evening, our imagined concubine prepares for another gathering. Her attendant helps her choose a garment. A necklace is placed around her neck. A small amount of perfume touches her skin. Then, before leaving, she pauses beside the doorway. For a moment, she looks at herself, not as a queen, not as a servant, but as a woman trying to understand her place in a world where beauty can open doors, and where the same beauty can attract unwanted attention. She steps into the corridor. Music is beginning somewhere ahead. The palace is becoming brighter, and as she walks toward the sound, she notices something that makes her slow down. Another woman is wearing a necklace remarkably similar to hers. Their eyes meet. Neither speaks. But in that quiet moment, our concubine realizes that the palace has another kind of luxury, the luxury of choice, and when many women are competing for limited attention, even the smallest difference can become important. Soon, she will discover that not every smile in the palace is a friendly one. And not every woman who shares a table with her wishes her well. The necklace is still fresh in our imagined concubine's mind. It was such a small thing, a simple piece of jewelry, perhaps nothing important to anyone outside the palace, but inside these walls, small things can acquire strange importance: a glance, a gift, a seat at a particular gathering, a servant who suddenly begins appearing more often at someone's doorway. The palace women notice, they always notice. Our imagined concubine has begun to understand that life among the royal women is not simply a story of friendship and comfort. There are rivalries, too. Not every woman is competing for the Pharaoh's affection. Some may be concerned with family status, others may hope to secure a better position for their children. Some may simply want recognition or influence within the household, and for a few, the Pharaoh's personal attention may be the most valuable thing of all. The problem is that attention cannot be divided equally. One evening, our concubine sits among several women during a quiet gathering. The room is filled with soft conversation. A musician plays gently in the corner. Servants move between the tables. Then the Pharaoh enters. The atmosphere changes almost imperceptibly. No one suddenly becomes dramatic. Instead, small things happen. One woman straightens her posture, another adjusts her necklace, someone smiles, another becomes unusually quiet. Our imagined concubine feels herself becoming aware of every movement around her. The Pharaoh speaks with several people. He accepts a cup, he listens to a musician, and then, briefly, his attention rests upon one particular woman. It may last only a few moments, but everyone sees it. Our concubine looks away. She tells herself it means nothing. Perhaps tomorrow, the same attention will fall upon someone else, and perhaps it will. That is the strange uncertainty of palace life. A woman could spend hours preparing herself, choosing clothing, arranging her hair, applying perfume, and still remain invisible. Another woman might enter a room unexpectedly and become the center of attention without trying. This could create resentment. But rivalry does not always appear as open hostility. More Often, it may be subtle, a compliment that does not quite sound sincere, a conversation that stops when someone approaches, a woman suddenly excluded from a gathering, a servant delivering news to one person but not another. The palace is a place where people learn to communicate without saying very much. Our imagined concubine becomes more careful, she listens before speaking, she notices who sits beside whom, she learns that some friendships are genuine, while others are based upon convenience, and she begins to understand the importance of choosing companions wisely. One woman becomes her closest friend, they speak together in the gardens, they share small secrets. They laugh quietly about ordinary things, yet even between them, there is an invisible boundary. Neither woman can forget where they live. If one receives special attention from the Pharaoh, the balance between them could change. Perhaps that is why their friendship becomes so precious. They know it could be tested. There are moments when the competition feels almost harmless, a woman wearing an especially beautiful necklace, another choosing a striking perfume, someone singing particularly well during an evening gathering. These things may seem innocent, and often they probably were, but beneath them lies the knowledge that royal attention can have consequences. A favored woman may receive gifts, she may gain influence, her family may benefit from her position. Her children, if she has them, may have better opportunities, and so, the stakes are larger than romance. The Pharaoh's affection can become a form of power. This is why our imagined concubine begins to think differently about attraction. Perhaps she once imagined that being noticed by the king would simply make her happy. Now she understands that it could change everything, and with that realization comes a new kind of caution. She no longer wants to attract attention at any cost. She wants to know what happens afterward. One evening, she sees the woman with the similar necklace standing alone in a corridor. The woman looks tired. For the first time, our concubine notices something beneath the rivalry. Perhaps this woman is frightened, too. Perhaps she is wondering whether tomorrow will bring favor or disappointment. The two women pass each other. There is no smile, no insult, only a brief glance, and somehow, that is enough, because behind the competition, they share something neither can escape. They are both living inside a world controlled by someone else. Still, the palace continues, music plays, servants carry lamps. The Nile flows beyond the walls, and somewhere nearby, the Pharaoh is preparing for another evening. Our imagined concubine does not yet know whether she will be invited to join him, but now, the possibility feels different, because meeting the Pharaoh is no longer simply a romantic dream. It is a moment that could alter her position among every woman around her, and soon, she will discover what it feels like when that moment finally arrives, when the palace doors open, and she finds herself standing in the presence of the man whose attention everyone has been quietly watching. The evening finally arrives. For days, perhaps weeks, our imagined concubine has wondered what it would feel like, not simply to see the Pharaoh from a distance, not to notice him entering a courtyard surrounded by officials, but to stand close enough to hear his voice, to discover whether the powerful figure everyone speaks about is different when the doors close and the palace becomes quiet. Now, unexpectedly, that moment has come. The invitation itself may have been simple. A servant arrives, a message is delivered, there is no announcement, no dramatic ceremony, just a few carefully spoken words. Our imagined concubine understands immediately. Tonight, she has been noticed. She returns to her chamber, her attendant helps her prepare. There is no need to rush. Her hair is arranged carefully, a clean linen garment is selected, a small amount of perfume is applied. Perhaps she chooses the necklace she wore several evenings earlier, the one that made another woman look at her differently. Tonight, she wears it again, but now she wonders whether she chose correctly. Too much jewelry might seem obvious. Too little might make her disappear into the background. There is no perfect answer. Eventually, she leaves her chamber. The palace feels different at night. The corridors are quieter. The sounds of ordinary life have faded. Oil lamps burn beside painted walls. The air carries the faint fragrance of flowers and incense. She walks beside a servant who guides her toward a private part of the royal residence. With every step, she becomes more aware of where she is going. Then comes the doorway. She pauses. For the first time, she wonders whether the pharaoh feels nervous about such meetings. Probably not. He has spent his entire life surrounded by people. Officials, family members, priests, servants, foreign visitors, women, everyone expects something from him. Perhaps the true mystery is not what he thinks of her, but what it must feel like to live as the person everyone else is trying to impress. The servant announces her. She enters. The room is quieter than she expected. The pharaoh is not surrounded by a crowd. There are only a few attendants nearby. The space is softly illuminated. The atmosphere is almost peaceful. Imagine concubine lowers her gaze respectfully, then she looks up. For the first time, she sees him not as a distant figure painted on temple walls, but as a human being. He looks tired. Perhaps the day has been long. Perhaps he has spent hours listening to officials discuss taxes, harvests, construction, and matters of state. For a brief moment, the image of the all-powerful ruler disappears. She sees only a man sitting in a quiet room at the end of a difficult day. And perhaps he sees something similar in her, not simply another beautiful woman, but someone who has traveled far from the life she once knew. Someone who is still learning how to belong here. The conversation begins quietly. Perhaps he asks where she came from. Perhaps he asks whether she has become comfortable in the palace. Perhaps he notices the flower in her hair. The questions are ordinary, and that makes them strangely important. She answers carefully. Then, slowly, she becomes more relaxed. The distance between them begins to disappear. Perhaps she smiles. Perhaps she tells him something amusing about the palace. Perhaps she speaks about the Nile. For the first time, she realizes that she does not have to remain silent simply because he is the pharaoh. She can speak. She can listen. She can be herself. And perhaps that is what makes the evening memorable. Not beauty, not jewelry, not perfume, but conversation. Still, she understands that she is being observed. Every gesture matters. The servants notice. The attendants notice. And somewhere beyond this room, other people may already be wondering why she was invited. The next morning, perhaps nothing changes. Or perhaps everything does. A servant may suddenly treat her with greater respect. Another woman may become distant. A gift may arrive. Or perhaps no gift comes at all. This uncertainty is part of the strange world she now inhabits. One evening with the pharaoh does not guarantee a future. It may not even guarantee another evening. But for now, as the lamps burn quietly and the palace sleeps beyond the walls, our imagined concubine sits in the presence of the most powerful man in her world. She realizes that the person she once imagined as distant and almost divine is still human, and perhaps the pharaoh realizes something too, that behind the beautiful clothing, the perfumes, and the carefully arranged appearance is a woman with her own memories, fears, and hopes. When she finally leaves the chamber, the corridor seems strangely different. She walks slowly back toward her rooms. The palace is silent, yet she knows that by morning, the quiet will be gone. People will begin asking questions, and somewhere among the royal women, someone will notice that she was absent, because in the palace, secrets rarely remain secrets for long, and the next time she enters a room, she may discover that everyone is watching her. The morning after her meeting with the Pharaoh arrives quietly. Nothing in the palace appears different. The sun still rises over the Nile, servants still carry water through the courtyards, fresh linen is still delivered to the royal rooms, and yet, our imagined concubine feels as though something inside her has shifted. She now knows what it is like to sit in the presence of the Pharaoh. She knows his voice, she knows the way he listens, and perhaps, more importantly, she knows that the palace will continue whether or not he notices her again. That realization brings a strange kind of calm. For the women living within the royal household, life could not revolve entirely around the king. There were long hours to fill, and so, entertainment became part of palace life. Music was among the most important. The ancient Egyptians had many musical instruments. Harpists could sit quietly beneath shaded columns, drawing soft melodies from strings. Flutes and pipes could create lighter sounds. Percussion instruments added rhythm. There were also singers and dancers who performed during celebrations, feasts, religious occasions, and private gatherings. For our imagined concubine, music becomes something she looks forward to. Sometimes it is loud enough to fill an entire courtyard. At other times, it is barely more than a whisper. One afternoon, she sits beneath a shaded roof while a musician practices nearby. The melody rises and falls, the notes drift across the warm air. A servant walks past carrying a basket, a child laughs somewhere in the distance. For a few minutes, everything feels peaceful. No one is discussing the Pharaoh, no one is wondering who has been invited to his chambers. There is only music, and perhaps that is why these moments are so valuable. Entertainment also provided opportunities for people to gather. A meal could become an evening of conversation, a festival could bring together members of the royal household. Dancers might perform, musicians might play, servants would carry food and drink, the palace would become brighter and more crowded. Our imagined concubine learns that such gatherings can be both enjoyable and complicated. At one celebration, she sits among several women while musicians perform. One woman laughs loudly, another joins a singer, a third watches the room carefully. Our concubine finds herself relaxing. She listens to the music. She watches the dancers. For a while, she forgets about competition. Then the Pharaoh appears. The atmosphere changes again, but this time, something is different. Instead of immediately trying to attract his attention, our imagined concubine remains where she is. She listens, she smiles when the music becomes lively, she speaks with the woman sitting beside her, and perhaps that is what catches the Pharaoh's eye, not an obvious attempt to seduce him. Not a carefully planned performance, simply a woman who appears comfortable in her own world. Eventually, he approaches, she rises respectfully, they exchange a few words, then he moves on. The moment is brief, but it reminds her of something important. Attraction can happen naturally. Sometimes the most memorable person in a crowded room is the one who does not seem desperate to be noticed. Later that evening, the music becomes softer, the guests begin to leave. Our imagined concubine walks into the garden. The night air is cool. She can still hear the distant harp. Somewhere behind the palace walls, the musicians are packing away their instruments. The celebration is ending, but another kind of entertainment remains. Stories. Ancient Egyptians loved stories, just as people everywhere have always done. A tale could be told while sitting beside a fire. A servant might repeat a story heard from another household. A musician might accompany a singer. A woman could tell her companions about something that happened years ago. These stories allowed people to escape the palace for a little while. They could imagine distant lands, strange adventures, gods and spirits, lost travelers, clever heroes. Our imagined concubine begins to enjoy these evenings. she realizes that the palace is not only a place of wealth and power, it is also a place where people try to forget those things. They sing, they laugh, they listen, they tell stories, and perhaps, for a few precious hours, they become ordinary human beings. Still, beneath the music and laughter, another subject is never far away. Love. The ancient Egyptians left behind poems, songs, paintings, and objects that reveal how deeply they valued affection, beauty, companionship, and desire. For our imagined concubine, these ideas are not merely ancient words, they are part of her own life. She has begun to wonder what love means in a world where power is never equally shared. Can affection exist when one person is a pharaoh and the other is not? Can a woman truly choose her heart's desire inside a royal household, or does love become something different when it grows beneath the shadow of power? As the last notes of music disappear into the night, she returns to her chamber. The questions remain, and tomorrow we will listen more closely to the ancient Egyptian understanding of love, a world where the heart could be described as a place of longing, where poetry could speak more honestly than ordinary conversation, and where even a royal concubine might quietly wonder whether the pharaoh's attention could ever become something deeper than desire. The music has faded now, the musicians have returned to their rooms, the lamps are burning lower, and beyond the palace walls, the Nile continues its slow journey through the darkness. Our imagined concubine lies awake for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the household. She thinks about the pharaoh, not as a ruler this time, not as the man whose attention can change the atmosphere of an entire room, but simply as a person. She wonders what love means to someone living in a world where everything is connected to duty, family, religion, and the gods. The ancient Egyptians left behind many glimpses of their feelings about love. They wrote poems about longing. They celebrated affection between husbands and wives. They created images of couples sitting close together, sometimes with arms gently touching. They left behind songs that speak of desire, beauty, and the restless heart. These fragments remind us that people in ancient Egypt experienced love in ways that were deeply human. They could miss someone. They could feel jealousy. They could long for a person who was far away. They could dream about someone they could not have. The heart, in ancient Egyptian thought, was especially important. It was not simply a symbol of romance. The heart was connected with a person's character, thoughts, emotions, and moral nature. To lose one's heart to someone could therefore mean something much deeper than simple attraction. For our imagined concubine, this idea is complicated. She lives in a palace where affection and power exist side by side. A woman might genuinely care for the pharaoh might genuinely care for her, and yet, the relationship could never be completely equal. He is the ruler, she is not. He can give, he can withdraw, he can decide. She must live with the consequences. Perhaps this is why the poems of ancient lovers feel so strangely familiar. They speak of the heart becoming restless, of longing for a beloved, of waiting for someone to appear. Our imagined concubine understands that feeling. Perhaps she waits for the pharaoh to visit again. Perhaps she finds herself thinking about him during ordinary moments, while walking through the garden, while choosing her clothing, while listening to music. The feeling may be exciting at first, then it becomes uncertain. Did he think about her too? Did the conversation mean anything? Was his attention genuine, or was she simply one person among many? These questions have no easy answers, and perhaps the ancient Egyptians understood this better than we sometimes imagine. Love was not always presented as perfect. There could be longing, separation, jealousy, desire, fear of losing someone. In some ancient love poems, the speaker sounds almost overwhelmed by the power of emotion. The beloved becomes impossible to ignore. the heart refuses to behave sensibly. 4. Someone living inside a royal palace, that could be dangerous, because love might encourage a person to forget the rules of the household. Our imagined concubine begins to wonder whether she should allow herself to feel deeply. If she loves the Pharaoh, what happens when he no longer visits? If she becomes attached, does she become vulnerable? Perhaps another woman receives his attention. Perhaps he becomes interested in someone new. Perhaps he simply becomes busy with the responsibilities of kingship. The heart does not understand palace schedules. It does not understand political priorities. It simply waits. One evening, she walks beside a pool filled with lotus flowers. The moon is reflected in the dark water. She remembers the first time she saw the Pharaoh. He seemed distant then, almost unreal. Now she remembers his voice, and suddenly, the memory feels more powerful than the meeting itself. She smiles quietly, then she becomes thoughtful. Perhaps this is what makes love so strange. It can turn an ordinary moment into something that stays with you. A conversation can last only a few minutes, yet the memory can remain for years. The palace may be filled with gold, perfume, music, and beautiful clothing, but none of those things can guarantee affection, and perhaps that is why the ancient Egyptian understanding of love feels so timeless. Even within the greatest palace, the heart remains beyond anyone's complete control. Our imagined concubine returns to her chamber. She removes her necklace. She places it carefully beside her bed. Then she extinguishes the lamp. Tomorrow, the palace will return to its ordinary rhythm. But something inside her has changed. She is no longer simply trying to be noticed. Now she is beginning to wonder what it would mean to truly be remembered. And as the seasons slowly turn, another kind of anticipation begins to fill the royal household, the arrival of festivals. For during those special days, the palace doors may open wider, music may echo through the courtyards, and the carefully ordered world of royal life may briefly become something brighter, louder, and more unpredictable. The quiet days of the palace do not continue forever. Every so often, the ordinary rhythm changes. The corridors become busier, servants move with greater purpose, fresh decorations appear, musicians arrive, flowers are carried into courtyards, and the air seems to hold a sense of expectation. A festival is approaching. For the people living within the royal household, these occasions offer a welcome break from routine. Ancient Egypt had many religious festivals throughout the year, often connected with temples, gods, the changing seasons, or important royal traditions. Some celebrations could last for days. Others brought enormous crowds into the streets and within the palace. Preparations could begin long before the festival itself. Our imagined concubine notices the change first through the servants. They seem busier than usual. More baskets arrive from the storerooms. More food is prepared. Fresh flowers appear throughout the palace. The musicians practice for longer hours. Even the quiet gardens feel different. There is movement everywhere. For the royal women, festivals can be an opportunity to dress more beautifully than usual. Fine linen is carefully selected, jewelry is polished, hair is arranged, perfume is prepared. Our imagined concubine chooses her clothing slowly. She has learned something since her arrival. She no longer dresses simply to attract attention. She dresses because she enjoys the feeling of being part of something larger. Still, she cannot completely ignore the possibility that the Pharaoh may be present. She chooses a delicate necklace. A small lotus flower is placed in her hair. A gentle fragrance is applied. Then she steps outside. The palace courtyard has been transformed. Flowers decorate the edges of the pools. Lamps hang beneath the covered walkways. Musicians sit together with their instruments. Servants carry trays of food. The air is filled with conversation. For a moment, our imagined concubine forgets the quiet competition that usually exists between the women. Everyone is watching the celebration, everyone is listening to the music. The palace feels almost joyful. Perhaps dancers move gracefully across the courtyard. Perhaps singers perform ancient songs. Perhaps people raise cups and share food. The sound of laughter travels beneath the columns. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, the larger city is celebrating too. This is one of the rare moments when the private world of the royal household connects with the wider world. Our imagined concubine looks toward the distant horizon. She can hear faint sounds coming from beyond the palace. The celebration is not hers alone, it belongs to an entire civilization. For a while, the boundaries between people seem softer, yet festivals also have another side. They bring people together, and whenever many people gather, information travels. Our concubine notices that some women are watching the Pharaoh, others are watching each other. A gift given publicly may be remembered, a conversation may be repeated. A woman who stands beside the Pharaoh for too long may become the subject of whispered speculation. Even during celebrations, palace politics never completely disappear. Still, our imagined concubine tries not to think about it. Instead, she allows herself to enjoy the evening. She watches a dancer move beneath the warm light. She listens to a harp. She tastes sweet fruit. She speaks with her closest friend. For several hours, she feels almost free. Yet later, when the night grows darker, the celebration becomes quieter. The musicians slow their playing. The lamps burn lower. Some guests begin to leave. Our imagined concubine walks toward a quieter corner of the palace garden. She can still hear the festival behind her. Then she notices someone approaching. It is the Pharaoh. For a moment, she considers stepping aside. Instead, she remains where she is. He stops beside the pool. They speak quietly. Perhaps he asks whether she enjoyed the celebration. Perhaps she tells him about the music. Maybe she smiles. The conversation is brief, but unlike their earlier meeting, this time she feels less nervous. She is beginning to understand how to speak with him. She is beginning to understand how to be near him without losing herself. And perhaps the Pharaoh notices the change. Perhaps he sees a woman who is no longer trying so hard to impress him, someone more comfortable, more confident. The festival ends, but the consequences may continue long after the music stops. The next morning, the palace returns to normal. The flowers begin to wilt. The decorations are removed. The musicians depart. Servants carry away the last remains of the feast. Yet the women remember everything. Who was seen? Who received attention? Who was invited? Who stood beside whom? Our imagined concubine returns to her daily routine, but she does not realize that someone else has been watching her, not the Pharaoh this time. A woman from another part of the royal household, a woman who noticed the conversation beside the lotus pool, a woman who has begun to wonder whether our concubine's position is becoming stronger. And as the palace settles back into silence, a new tension quietly takes root, because in the royal household, jealousy rarely arrives with a loud announcement. Sometimes, it begins with nothing more than a woman watching from across the room. The festival is over. The flowers have begun to fade. The musicians have gone. The palace corridors have returned to their familiar quiet. Yet something has changed. Our imagined concubine can feel it, not in anything anyone says directly. There are no accusations, no open arguments, only small differences. A conversation that stops when she enters a room. A woman who once greeted her warmly now offers only a polite smile. A servant who used to linger beside her doorway now seems to have somewhere else to be. At first, she tries not to notice. Perhaps she is imagining things. Perhaps everyone is simply tired after the festival. But then, one morning, She walks into a courtyard and sees the woman who had been watching her after the celebration. Their eyes meet, the other woman smiles, it is a perfectly pleasant smile, and somehow, that makes it more unsettling. Our concubine has begun to understand something important about palace life. Jealousy does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind courtesy, sometimes it speaks through silence, and sometimes it moves through the palace like a shadow. The pharaoh's attention is one source of jealousy, but it is not the only one. Royal households are complicated places. Women may have connections to different families, some may have influential relatives, some may have children, others may have servants who are particularly loyal. A woman's position could depend upon many things that had little to do with beauty. This means that the palace is filled with relationships that are difficult to see from the outside. Our imagined concubine begins to notice them. She discovers that one woman has a close connection to an important official, another has relatives connected with the royal administration, a third has a child whose future could become extremely important. Suddenly, she understands why some women seem so confident. They are not standing alone. They have networks, families, allies, and perhaps even people who owe them favors. Our concubine has none of these things, not yet. Her position depends largely on herself, and that realization makes her more careful. She begins listening more closely. One afternoon, she sits with her closest friend beneath a shaded roof. Her friend speaks quietly. She warns her that a certain woman has been asking questions. Nothing serious, just questions. Where did she come from? How long has she been in the palace? How often has she met the pharaoh? Our concubine feels a sudden chill. She realizes that her private life may no longer belong entirely to her. Every visit can become information. Every gift can become evidence. Every conversation can be interpreted. She asks her friend what she should do. The answer is simple. Be careful. Do not boast. Do not create unnecessary enemies. And above all, do not assume that everyone who smiles at you is your friend. The advice stays with her. From that day forward, she becomes quieter, not frightened, just more observant. She notices who sits near the pharaoh during meals. She notices which servants carry messages. She notices which women receive new jewelry. She learns to recognize the difference between genuine happiness and carefully performed happiness. Yet palace politics can also be surprisingly ordinary. A disagreement over seating, a dispute between servants, a complaint about food, a woman believing another has received more attention than she deserves. These small matters may seem insignificant, but inside a closed community, small tensions can grow. Our imagined concubine watches one argument unfold from a distance. Two women are speaking sharply to one another. The reason seems almost ridiculous, a missing bracelet, but everyone knows the bracelet is not the real issue. The real issue is pride, status, recognition, the fear of being overlooked. The argument ends quickly. A servant intervenes. The women separate. By evening, everyone is pretending nothing happened. But the palace remembers. It always remembers. Our concubine begins to wonder whether she can ever truly feel safe here. Then, unexpectedly, she receives a small kindness. A servant leaves fresh flowers outside her chamber. No message, no explanation, just flowers. She smiles. Perhaps not everyone is watching her with suspicion. Perhaps some people are simply kind. That evening, she places the flowers beside her bed. Their scent fills the room. For a little while, the palace politics seem far away, but then a message arrives. The pharaoh has summoned her again. Her heart begins to beat faster, not because she is afraid, because she knows what another meeting could mean. If people already noticed her before, they will notice even more now. She looks at the flowers, then toward the doorway. The palace has become a place where affection and danger can exist side by side. One moment can bring happiness, the next can create resentment, and as she prepares to leave her room, she realizes that her life is slowly becoming connected to something far greater than her own desires. The future of the royal household may soon involve her in another way, because there is one thing more powerful than jewelry, perfume, or even the pharaoh's attention: a child. And if she were ever to become the mother of one, her position could change forever. But with that possibility would come a different kind of responsibility, a responsibility that could last long after the music, the festivals, and even the pharaoh himself had disappeared. The palace is quieter on some mornings than others, but there is one sound that can change everything: the sound of a child laughing. Our imagined concubine begins to notice it more often: children running through shaded courtyards, small footsteps echoing along stone corridors, young voices calling for attendance. The royal household is not only a place for adults, it is also a place where children are raised beneath the watchful eyes of an entire community. For a woman who gives birth to a child connected to the pharaoh, life can change in ways she could never have imagined. Motherhood brings joy, but it also brings responsibility, and inside the palace, raising a royal child is not something one person does alone. There are nurses, attendants, servants, tutors, and other members of the household. Each person may have a role in the child's life. Our imagined concubine watches this world from a distance at first. She sees children being carried through the gardens. She sees them playing beside fountains. She notices older attendants correcting their behavior when they become too noisy. There is laughter, but there are also rules. A royal child must learn how to behave, how to speak, how to sit, how to greet important people. From a young age, children connected to the royal family may be surrounded by expectations. They are not simply children, they represent the future, and their position may affect the status of their mothers. For our imagined concubine, this possibility is both beautiful and frightening. A child could give her a deeper connection to the royal household, but it could also bring new uncertainties. Who would protect the child? Who would educate them? What position would they eventually hold? Would they remain close to the pharaoh? Would they be recognized as part of the royal family? The answers could depend on circumstances far beyond her control. Motherhood also changes the rhythms of daily life. The quiet hours she once spent alone become filled with responsibility. There are moments of exhaustion, moments of tenderness, moments when she simply watches her child sleeping. Those moments may be the most peaceful of all. One afternoon, she sits beneath a palm tree holding the small hand of a child. The palace is busy around them. Servants carry baskets. Women walk through the courtyard. Musicians practice somewhere nearby. But the child seems unaware of all of it. The little one is fascinated by something simple: a bird, a flower, a small pool of water reflecting the sunlight. Our imagined concubine watches, and for a moment, she forgets the palace, she forgets rivalry, she forgets the pharaoh. She is simply a mother, yet the palace never completely allows anyone to forget their position. The child may belong to a powerful household. That means everyone watches. The way the child is dressed, the people who care for them, the gifts they receive, even the people who spend time with them. A mother must think carefully. She must choose whom to trust. A careless servant could create problems. A jealous rival could spread rumors. A political change could affect the child's future. And so, motherhood becomes another form of palace navigation. Our imagined concubine begins to understand why some royal women become so protective. The palace can be beautiful, but beauty does not make it safe. A child's future may depend on decisions made by adults who never explain themselves. One day, she watches her child being taught by an older instructor. The lesson is simple. The child is learning words, learning to recognize symbols, learning the traditions of the household. Our concubine sits quietly nearby. She feels pride, but beneath that pride is a question. What kind of person will this child become? Will they remember the woman who raised them? Will they remember the quiet gardens, the palace corridors, the sound of music at night? Perhaps one day, the child will grow older and leave. That thought feels impossible now. Yet time inside the palace moves quietly. Years disappear, children become adults. Women who once seemed young begin to notice the first signs of age, and the Pharaoh himself grows older. Our imagined concubine looks at her child. She realizes that her life is no longer entirely her own. Whatever happens to her position, she will always be connected to this child. That connection may be her greatest comfort. It may also become her greatest source of worry, because a royal child can bring a woman closer to power, but power is never permanent, and one day, the Pharaoh may no longer look at her as he once did. The palace may begin to change around her, the gifts may become less frequent. The invitations may stop, and when that day comes, she will discover a truth that every woman inside the royal household eventually has to face. What happens when the Pharaoh's attention moves somewhere else? There is a particular kind of silence that only becomes noticeable after it has already arrived. Our imagined concubine knows it now. She remembers when the palace once felt full of possibilities. A servant might appear unexpectedly, a message might arrive, an invitation could transform an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. In those days, every sound in the corridor seemed important. Now, she notices something different. The footsteps still pass her doorway, but they no longer stop. The invitations become less frequent. The gifts that once appeared occasionally begin to disappear, and at first, she tells herself not to worry. The Pharaoh is busy. Kings have responsibilities. There are officials to meet, temples to visit, foreign delegations to receive. The affairs of the kingdom never truly end. Perhaps tomorrow will be different, but tomorrow comes, and nothing changes. This is one of the most difficult realities of life inside a royal household. The Pharaoh's attention is never guaranteed. A woman may be beautiful, she may be intelligent, she may have shared meaningful conversations with him. She may even have given birth to a child, and still, the balance of attention can shift. A new woman may arrive, someone younger, someone from an influential family, someone who simply happens to capture the king's interest. The palace does not stop when this happens. That is what makes it so painful. Everyone continues with their routines. Meals are served, music is played, servants carry water, the gardens are maintained. Only one person feels that her world has changed. Our imagined concubine begins to notice another woman receiving the attention she once enjoyed. She sees the familiar signs, a special invitation, a new garment, perhaps a piece of jewelry, a servant waiting outside a particular chamber. She recognizes the pattern immediately. Once, she might have felt angry. Now, she feels something more complicated, a little jealousy, a little sadness, and, unexpectedly, a little sympathy. Because she knows exactly what it feels like to hope. She remembers sitting beside her mirror, choosing a necklace, wondering whether the Pharaoh would notice. She remembers the nervous excitement of hearing her name called. Now, she watches someone else experience the same thing. It is almost like looking at her younger self, and she realizes something. The palace does not create winners and losers in a simple way. A woman who is favored today may be forgotten tomorrow. The woman who feels invisible now may become important later. Everything changes, nothing stays still. This uncertainty can affect the relationships between women. Some respond with anger, some withdraw. Others begin searching for new sources of security. Our imagined concubine chooses a different path. She begins investing her attention in the people around her, her child, her friends, the servants she trusts, the quiet routines that once seemed boring. She discovers that a life can continue even after the person you once centered it around has moved away. Still, there are difficult moments. One afternoon, she enters a courtyard and hears music, the same kind of music that once played during one of her happiest evenings. She stops. For a moment, memories return. The Pharaoh sitting nearby, the warm lamps, the conversation, the feeling that perhaps she had finally found a place in the palace. Then the memory fades. She continues walking. Perhaps this is what growing older means, not forgetting the past, but learning how to carry it without allowing it to control you. There may also be practical consequences when royal attention changes. A woman who once received special treatment may no longer have the same influence. Servants may become less attentive, others may stop seeking her approval. Her position within the household can become less certain, but for some women, there are other forms of security: family connections, children, property, gifts received during earlier years, skills, relationships. The palace is not one single system. Every woman's circumstances are different. Our imagined concubine begins to understand that her greatest strength may not have been the Pharaoh's attention at all. It may have been the life she built around herself, the friendships she maintained, the child she raised, the memories she created. One evening, she sees the Pharaoh from a distance. He is older now, perhaps more tired, perhaps carrying the weight of years upon his shoulders. Their eyes meet briefly. There is no dramatic moment, no invitation follows, no promise is made, only recognition. He remembers her. She knows it, and strangely, that is enough. She does not need him to return to the past. She does not need to become the center of his world again. She simply allows the memory to exist. Then she turns away. For the first time, she understands that losing someone's attention does not necessarily mean losing yourself. And as she walks back toward her rooms, she begins to notice something she had ignored for years. The palace has changed. The women are older. The children have grown. The corridors feel familiar. And she herself is no longer the young woman who once arrived here with questions in her eyes. She has entered another stage of life, a stage where beauty is no longer her greatest advantage, where attention is no longer the measure of her worth, where she must decide what remains when the excitement is gone. The answer, she slowly discovers, may be surprisingly simple. Her memories remain, her friendships remain, her family remains, and perhaps, somewhere within the palace, her name is still spoken, not because the Pharaoh remembered her, but because someone else did, and that may be the quietest victory of all. Yet time has another lesson waiting for her. The years do not stop simply because the palace has forgotten to look her way, and soon, she will begin to notice the first signs of something even more unavoidable: the slow passage of age. The years do not announce themselves when they arrive, they simply pass. One morning, our imagined concubine notices a silver thread among her dark hair. She pauses before the polished bronze mirror. For a moment, she simply looks, then she smiles. It is not the first sign of age she has noticed. There were others: the changing rhythm of her days, the children who once ran through the palace now walking with the confidence of adults, the women who once seemed older than her now gone. From the household, even the palace itself feels different. Walls have been repaired, rooms have been rearranged, new faces have appeared, and yet, the Nile continues flowing beyond the palace. Time moves quietly. For a woman who once lived partly through the Pharaoh's attention, growing older can bring complicated feelings. The world often places great importance on youth, especially within a royal household where beauty may influence who receives attention, but age can also bring something that youth cannot: knowledge, experience, perspective. Our imagined concubine has learned how the palace works. She knows which corridors remain cool during the hottest hours. She knows which servants can be trusted. She knows when to speak and when silence is wiser. She has watched enough rivalries to understand that most eventually fade. She has seen women become favorites and then disappear from the center of attention. She has seen children become adults. She has watched the Pharaoh change, and she has changed too. Perhaps she no longer spends hours preparing for every gathering. Her clothing becomes simpler, her jewelry becomes more carefully chosen. She does not need to prove anything. There is a certain freedom in that. One afternoon, she sits with younger women in the palace garden. They are discussing something that happened during a recent gathering. One of them is excited, another is worried. A third is convinced that the Pharaoh has noticed her. Our imagined concubine listens. She recognizes the excitement in their voices. She remembers feeling exactly the same way. She could tell them that attention does not last, that beauty changes, that the palace will eventually teach them lessons they cannot yet imagine, but she does not. Instead, she smiles. Let them have their dreams. Every generation must discover the truth for itself. Perhaps one of the younger women asks her about the Pharaoh. What was he like when she first arrived? Did he really speak to her? Was he kind? Our concubine pauses. She could tell them stories, but she realizes that memories become different with age. The Pharaoh she remembers is not exactly the same man he was. Her own memory has changed him. She remembers his voice more clearly than his face. She remembers the feeling of those evenings more than the words they exchanged. Perhaps this is what time does. It removes the unnecessary details. What remains is emotion, a feeling, a moment, a memory that refuses to disappear. As she grows older, her role in the palace may also change. She becomes someone younger women can approach, someone who understands the hidden rules. She knows how to recognize a dangerous friendship. She knows how to survive disappointment. She understands that a quiet life can sometimes be more valuable than a powerful one. Her knowledge becomes its own kind of influence, not the influence of beauty, not the influence of royal favor, something quieter, something earned. There are still difficult days. Sometimes she misses the excitement of youth. Sometimes she looks at younger women and remembers who she once was, but there is no bitterness in her. She has lived long enough to know that every stage of life carries something different. Youth brought possibility, middle age brought responsibility, and now, perhaps, she begins to discover peace. One evening, she walks through the palace gardens alone. The sun is setting. The same lotus pools are still there. The same palms are moving gently in the evening breeze. She remembers standing here many years earlier. She was young then. She believed every important moment was still ahead of her. Now, she understands that some of the most important moments were the ones she barely noticed at the time: a conversation with a friend, a child's first steps, a quiet meal, a night when she sat beside a pool and listened to music. None of these moments were recorded on temple walls, yet they were her life, and perhaps that is the secret of growing older. You begin to understand that a meaningful life does not always leave behind a monument. Sometimes it exists only in memory. Our imagined concubine reaches the edge of the garden. She looks toward the palace. The building is beautiful beneath the fading light, but she no longer feels that it owns her. She has lived within its walls. She has been shaped by it. She has loved and suffered there, but she has also become someone beyond it. And as darkness slowly settles across the Nile, she realizes that another change is approaching. The palace has always been full of noise. But there are places where the noise never reaches, hidden corners, quiet rooms, small gardens. There are places inside a palace that almost nobody remembers, not the grand halls, not the ceremonial rooms, not the courtyards where musicians once performed, the quiet places, a narrow garden behind a wall, a shaded bench beneath an old tree, a small room where servants stored folded linen, a passageway that led nowhere important. These were the spaces our imagined concubine began to appreciate most. As the years passed, she discovered that the palace had two different lives. There was the life everyone could see, and then there was the life that happened when nobody was watching. The public palace was filled with movement. People came and went, messages traveled. Meals were prepared, visitors arrived, important conversations took place behind carefully guarded doors. But behind all of this was another world, a quieter one. Here, servants could sit down for a few moments after carrying heavy baskets. A woman could mend clothing without being interrupted. Two friends could whisper together. Someone could simply stare at the Nile and think. Our imagined concubine begins to spend more time in these hidden corners. She has no need to be seen now. No need to attract attention, no need to wonder who is watching. Sometimes, she sits beneath a palm tree near the edge of the palace grounds. From there, she can hear the distant sounds of daily life. The call of a servant, the footsteps of someone walking across stone, the faint voice of a musician practicing, and beyond the walls, the Nile. That sound becomes familiar, almost comforting. She begins to realize that the river is the one thing in her life that has remained constant. People have changed, the Pharaoh has changed, the palace has changed, but the Nile continues moving, slowly, patiently, without concern for who is powerful and who is forgotten. There are also quiet moments inside the women's quarters. At night, when most people have gone to sleep, a few women may remain awake. One might be repairing a piece of clothing, another might be combing her hair, someone else might tell a story from her childhood. These conversations are different from the ones held during festivals. There is no audience, no need to impress anyone. People speak more honestly. Our imagined concubine listens to stories about distant villages. One woman remembers growing up near fields. Another talks about her mother. A third remembers a childhood friend whose name she has not heard in years. For a little while, the palace disappears. The women are no longer royal companions. They are simply people remembering where they came from. Perhaps this is one of the strangest parts of palace life. The closer you live to power, the more valuable ordinary moments can become. A quiet meal, a familiar voice, a private conversation, a place where nobody expects anything from you. Our imagined concubine understands this now. She also begins noticing the servants more carefully. For years, she had seen them moving through the palace, carrying water, preparing food, cleaning rooms, delivering messages, but now she begins to recognize their faces. She learns their names. She notices when someone is tired. She thanks them. These small gestures may seem insignificant, but inside a household built on hierarchy, kindness can become memorable. One servant, an older woman, begins visiting her occasionally. They sit together in a quiet corner near the garden. They talk about nothing important, the weather, the river, the changing seasons. Sometimes they say almost nothing at all, and that is enough. Our imagined concubine realizes that companionship does not always require grand declarations. Sometimes, it is simply the comfort of sitting beside someone who understands silence. One evening, she finds herself walking through a forgotten corridor. The walls are cooler here, the lamps are fewer. Her footsteps make a soft sound against the stone floor. She stops beside a small opening in the wall. Through it, she can see the night sky. the stars are bright, she stands there for a long time, no one comes looking for her, no one asks where she is, and strangely, she feels completely safe. Perhaps this is the freedom she had been searching for without realizing it, not freedom from the palace, but freedom from the need to be important inside it. She no longer needs every moment to have meaning. She can simply exist. As the years continue, these quiet places become part of her life. She knows where the morning light falls, she knows which garden is empty at sunset, she knows which corridor stays cool during the hottest months. The palace has become a map of memories, and yet, even in these peaceful corners, time continues moving. The people she knows are growing older, the Pharaoh is growing older, her own body is changing. One day, she realizes that the quiet corners she loves so much may soon become the places where she spends most of her remaining years. The thought does not frighten her, but it makes her pause, because eventually, every palace becomes a place of endings. And as she looks across the silent garden, she begins to wonder what will happen when her own story finally reaches its last chapter, when the palace doors close behind her, and when there is no longer any reason for anyone to wait for her return. The palace does not become silent all at once. It happens gradually. A familiar voice disappears, then another. A room that once belonged to someone is emptied. A servant leaves. A child grows older and moves away. And one morning, our imagined concubine realizes that she has become one of the oldest women in the household. She does not feel old, not in the way she once imagined. She still remembers the young woman who first entered the palace. Sometimes, when she closes her eyes, she can almost see her, a little nervous, curious, unsure of what waited beyond the enormous doors. That young woman believed the palace was a place where everything lasted forever. Now she knows better. The final years of a concubine's life could vary greatly. Some women may have remained connected to the royal household. Others may have moved into different roles. Some may have lived with children or family members. Others may have received property or gifts that provided security. The lives of these women were not all the same, but for our imagined concubine, the palace has become familiar enough to feel like home. Even though she knows it was never truly hers, she walks through the corridors slowly now, not because she is weak, because she has learned not to hurry. There is nothing left to prove. One morning, she visits the garden where she once spent time with her closest friend. The friend is gone now. Perhaps she died. Perhaps she left the palace years ago. Perhaps she simply disappeared into another part of Egypt. The details have become uncertain, but the memory remains. Our concubine sits beneath the same palm tree. She remembers their conversations, the warnings, the laughter, the quiet moments when neither woman needed to speak. She wonders if her friend ever thinks about this place, perhaps, somewhere far away. She does. The thought makes her smile. As the years pass, our imagined concubine becomes increasingly aware of how much has changed. The Pharaoh she once knew may have become a distant figure. Perhaps a new ruler has taken his place. Perhaps the palace has welcomed another generation. New women arrive. New servants begin their work. Young children run through corridors where older children once played. The cycle continues, and our concubine watches it all. Sometimes, younger women approach her. They ask questions. They want to know what the palace was like years ago. Was the Pharaoh really as charming as people say? Was the old garden always there? Who lived in the rooms near the eastern courtyard? Our concubine answers when she can. But she also understands that memory is unreliable. People remember what matters to them. Two people can experience the same event and carry away completely different stories. So she does not try to become the official historian of the palace. She simply shares what she remembers. One evening, She finds an old piece of jewelry among her belongings. It is not particularly valuable, perhaps it was a gift from many years ago. She holds it in her hand. For a moment, the past feels very close. She remembers wearing it when she was younger. She remembers how important the gift seemed, how she believed it meant something. Now, the object is simply a memory, and perhaps that is what happens to everything eventually. Objects lose their original meaning, buildings change, names disappear, but memories can remain long after the objects themselves are gone. Our imagined concubine places the jewelry back in its box. She does not need to wear it again. She knows what it represents: her life, her youth, her hopes, the person she once was. Her final years are not filled with constant sadness. There are still peaceful mornings, still warm meals, still conversations, still moments when the sun shines beautifully across the Nile. Age has not taken everything from her. In some ways, it has given her something. She no longer measures happiness by attention. She does not wait for footsteps outside her door. She does not wonder which woman the Pharaoh prefers. The questions that once seemed so important have become distant. What remains is simpler: a garden, a familiar face, a child's memory, the sound of water, the smell of lotus flowers, the warmth of sunlight on stone. These things are enough. One afternoon, she walks toward the edge of the palace grounds. The Nile is visible beyond the walls. Boats move slowly across the water. The river carries them onward. She watches until they disappear, and she thinks about how much of life is like that. People arrive, people leave, some stay for years, others remain only briefly. No one can hold them forever. As evening approaches, she returns to her room. The light is fading. She sits beside the window. The palace is beginning its nightly transformation. Servants light the lamps, doors close, voices become quieter. The familiar sounds of evening fill the corridors. She listens, and for the first time, she wonders what the palace will sound like without her. Will anyone remember the way she walked through these halls? Will anyone remember her voice? Will anyone know which garden she loved? Perhaps not, and yet, she does not feel afraid. She has learned that being remembered is not the same as having lived. A life does not become meaningless simply because history forgets it. She lived, she felt, she loved, she experienced moments that belonged entirely to her. That is enough. The night grows darker. She closes her eyes. Tomorrow will come, but perhaps tomorrow will be different. Perhaps she will finally leave the palace. Perhaps she will remain. Perhaps the end will arrive quietly, as most things do. For now, she listens to the Nile, and somewhere in the distance, a young woman is laughing. Our imagined concubine smiles. She knows that laughter, it is the sound of youth. The sound of someone who still believes the future is endless, and perhaps, as she listens, she realizes that the palace will always belong to the young, until one day, they too discover that time has quietly been waiting for them. And as the night deepens around her, our concubine prepares for the final transition of her life, the moment when even the most beautiful palace must eventually become a memory. Night arrives slowly along the Nile. First, the last colors of sunset disappear, then the rooftops become dark silhouettes, the temples grow quiet, and one by one, the lamps of the palace begin to glow. Our imagined concubine has always known the palace by daylight. She knows its courtyards beneath the bright Egyptian sun. She knows the gardens when birds are singing. She knows the polished stone corridors filled with servants. But nighttime reveals another palace. A quieter one, a more mysterious one. Perhaps this is why she has always loved the evening. When darkness arrives, the palace seems to forget its own importance. The great halls become empty. The courtyards fall silent. The footsteps become fewer. Even the people who once seemed constantly busy eventually disappear behind closed doors. Our imagined concubine sits beside her window. The night air is cooler now. She can feel a gentle breeze moving through the room. Beyond the palace walls, the Nile reflects the moonlight. The river seems almost silver. Small boats have disappeared from the water. The fields are dark. The distant villages are quiet. Somewhere, a dog barks. Then everything becomes still again. She listens. The sounds of night are different from the sounds of day. During daylight, the palace belongs to everyone. At night, it seems to belong to shadows. A servant walks down a distant corridor carrying a lamp. The small flame moves slowly across the darkness, then it disappears around a corner. For a moment, our concubine wonders where the servant is going, perhaps carrying a message, perhaps checking a doorway, perhaps simply finishing the last task of the day. Night does not stop work completely. Palaces require constant attention. There are lamps to maintain, doors to guard, food to prepare for the following morning. People who need to move quietly through the sleeping household. Yet compared with the day, everything feels slower, softer. Our imagined concubine steps outside. She walks through a quiet garden. The lotus flowers are closed now, their petals folded into the darkness. Palm trees move gently in the breeze. Above her, the stars are astonishingly bright. Ancient Egyptians lived beneath a sky that must have seemed enormous. Without modern city lights, the night would have been filled with stars. The heavens were not simply beautiful. They were meaningful. The ancient Egyptians observed the movement of celestial bodies and connected the sky with their religious beliefs. The stars could represent the eternal world, the journey of the gods. The order of the universe. For our imagined concubine, however, the night sky feels personal. She looks upward, and for a few moments, the palace disappears. There is no Pharaoh, no rivalry, no social position, only the stars. Perhaps she wonders how many people have stood beneath this same sky: the Pharaoh, the servants, the farmers, the children, the women who lived in this palace before her. Everyone looked upward at some point. Everyone saw the same stars, and perhaps that thought brings her comfort. She continues walking. Near the edge of the garden, she hears music, very faint. A musician is playing somewhere inside the palace. Perhaps someone cannot sleep. Perhaps a private gathering is still taking place. The melody drifts through the night air. Our concubine stops to listen. The sound reminds her of another time, another evening, another version of herself. She remembers being young. She remembers believing that every night might bring something unexpected, a message, an invitation, a conversation. Now, the music makes her think about something else. How quickly a life passes. A person can spend years waiting for the future, only to discover that the future has already become the past. She smiles quietly, then she continues walking. At the end of the garden, she finds a small stone seat. She sits. The palace rises behind her, massive, beautiful, silent. For centuries, people have imagined royal life as endless luxury, gold, perfume, and music, beautiful clothing. But nighttime reveals another truth. Even inside the greatest palace, people still become tired. They still miss people. They still worry about tomorrow. They still lie awake with questions they cannot answer. The Pharaoh himself may be sleeping somewhere behind those walls, perhaps surrounded by servants, perhaps guarded, perhaps completely alone. Power does not prevent loneliness, and our imagined concubine understands this now. She once believed the Pharaoh possessed everything. Now she realizes that even a king cannot possess time. He cannot command the sun to stop. He cannot prevent his children from growing older. He cannot keep every person he loves beside him forever, the same. River flows past the palace. the same stars remain above it, and eventually, every human being becomes part of the past. A cool breeze passes through the garden. Our concubine rises. She walks slowly back toward her chamber. The palace lamps are burning lower. The servants have become fewer. The corridors are almost completely silent. She pauses before entering her room. For a moment, she looks back. The palace seems endless, but she knows better. Nothing is endless, not kings, not beauty, not power, not even memory. She enters her chamber. The door closes softly. The final lamp remains burning beside her. Outside, the Nile continues its ancient journey. It flowed before she was born. It will flow after she is gone. And perhaps that is the quietest lesson of all. History does not belong only to those whose names were carved into stone. It belongs to everyone who lived beneath the same sky. Everyone who woke beside the Nile. Everyone who loved someone, everyone who waited, everyone who hoped, and everyone who eventually disappeared into the darkness of time. Our imagined concubine lies down. The lamp flickers. The palace grows still, and as her eyes close, the story of her life begins to drift away, like the last notes of music carried across the sleeping river. Soon, the sun will rise again, another day will begin, but for now, there is only darkness, only stars, only the quiet Nile, and the gentle feeling that, for one final night, the palace is allowing her to rest. And now, the palace is quiet. The long corridors that once echoed with footsteps have fallen still. The music has ended. The laughter has faded. The lamps that once illuminated celebrations are burning softly, their little flames trembling in the warm night air. And somewhere within this enormous royal household, an older woman is preparing to rest. Our imagined concubine has reached the end of a long journey, not a journey measured in miles, but in years. She entered the palace. When she was young, she arrived carrying memories of another life, perhaps another home, another family, another version of herself. At first, the palace seemed impossibly large. Its walls were covered with beautiful paintings. Its courtyards were filled with flowers. Its storerooms held more food than she had ever imagined, and everywhere she looked, there were servants moving quietly through the shadows. She thought the palace would always feel strange, but slowly, almost without noticing, it became familiar. She learned the corridors, she learned the gardens, she learned the rhythm of the household. She learned when to speak, when to remain silent, when to trust, and when to simply walk away. She experienced the strange privilege of living close to a king. She knew the beauty that came with it, and she knew the uncertainty. She learned that a pharaoh's attention could make a woman feel powerful one day, and forgotten the next. She saw rivalries begin and disappear. She watched women arrive with hopes in their hearts. She watched others leave with memories they would carry for the rest of their lives. She watched children grow. She watched servants grow old. She watched the palace itself change. And somewhere along the way, she changed too. Perhaps the young woman who first entered those doors would not recognize the person she became. The young woman wanted to be noticed. The older woman simply wanted peace. The young woman wondered what the Pharaoh thought of her. The older woman wondered whether the people she loved were safe. The young woman believed happiness might be found in royal favor. The older woman discovered it in quieter places, in a friend's laughter, in a child's hand, in the scent of lotus flowers, in the cool shade of a garden, in the sound of the Nile moving gently beneath the stars. And perhaps that is the most human part of her story, because beneath the gold, beneath the linen, beneath the palace walls, she was simply a person trying to find meaning in the life she had been given. Tonight, as she looks through the window of her chamber, the palace seems almost peaceful. The moon hangs above the Nile. The palm trees move gently in the breeze. A distant lamp glows beside a doorway. Somewhere, a servant is walking home after finishing the last task of the night. Somewhere else, a child is sleeping, and perhaps the Pharaoh is sleeping too. For a moment, our imagined concubine thinks about him, not with longing now, not with jealousy, only with understanding. He was a king, but he was also a man. He lived beneath the same sky, he watched the same sun rise, he felt time passing, and perhaps he too sometimes wondered what would remain when everything was over. The great temples would remain, the statues might remain, the inscriptions might remain, but people disappear, names fade. Memories become uncertain. Even the most powerful ruler can eventually become a question asked by someone living thousands of years later, and perhaps that is why the smallest objects can sometimes feel so precious: a comb, a bracelet, a perfume vessel, a piece of linen, something ordinary, left behind by someone whose name history never recorded. We can hold such objects today and wonder, who touched this, who wore it? Who laughed while holding it? Who cried? Who waited beside a window for someone who never came? We will never know. The past keeps many secrets, and perhaps it always will. Our imagined concubine places her old jewelry beside her bed. She does not need to wear it tonight. She has carried its memories long enough. She closes the window. The room becomes still. She lies down. Outside, the palace continues breathing. A door closes, footsteps fade, an owl calls somewhere in the darkness, then silence. The Nile continues flowing, slowly, patiently, as it has done for thousands of years, and perhaps, if we could stand beside that ancient river tonight, we might realize something. The pharaohs were never the whole story. They were only the names that survived. The real story was also made by the forgotten, by women who waited, by servants who worked, by children who played, by musicians whose melodies disappeared with the wind, by ordinary people who lived ordinary moments beneath extraordinary skies. Their names may be gone, but their lives were real. They felt the warmth of the sun. They tasted food, they knew fear, they knew happiness. They loved people who mattered to them, and eventually, they slept, just as we do. So, as our story gently comes to an end, allow the palace to fade from your imagination. Let the sandstone walls disappear. Let the golden decorations become shadows. Let the voices grow distant. Imagine the moonlight resting quietly on the Nile. Imagine the palm trees moving in the cool night air. Imagine the last lamp in the palace slowly becoming dim, and somewhere, in the peaceful darkness, our imagined concubine is finally resting, no longer waiting, no longer wondering, no longer needing to be remembered, just resting, and perhaps that is where every story eventually leads. Not to fame, not to power, not even to immortality, but to silence, the same silence that waits for kings and servants, for queens and concubines, for the famous and the forgotten. And yet, here we are, thousands of years later, still asking questions about them, still imagining their lives, still wondering what it felt like to stand beneath the Egyptian stars. So perhaps the story is not truly over, because somewhere beneath the desert sands, another forgotten room may still be waiting. Another small object may still lie untouched. Another woman's story may be sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for someone, someday, to ask the simplest question of all: who was she? And perhaps that is the mystery that history leaves us with, not knowing everything, but knowing that behind every ancient name carved into stone were countless people whose stories were never written, people who lived, people who dreamed, people who loved, people who waited, people who disappeared, and perhaps, just perhaps, one of them was waiting for us to remember. Now, let the Nile grow quiet, let the palace fade into darkness, let the ancient stars disappear one by one, And as you drift toward sleep, remember that the world you know is also becoming history right now. Tonight, while you are listening, someone, somewhere, is living a small moment that may never be recorded. A conversation, a smile, a quiet goodbye, a memory, and thousands of years from now, no one may know it ever happened, or perhaps, somewhere in the distant future, someone will wonder, they will find a forgotten object, read a faded name, discover a fragment of a life, and they will ask the same question we have been asking tonight. What was it really like to be there? And just like that, the story begins again.